Today we're going to learn from a facial analysis expert and a human lie detector about how to read your opponent during a negotiation.
So I'm not listening simply to what they say, I'm listening to how they say it. I'm listening to gaps in the speech. I'm listening to changes in their tone, changes in the rhythm of speech, which will indicate anxiety, insecurity. I'm paying attention to changes in their breathing patterns. I'm watching for changes in gesture.
You'll be learning how to negotiate better in your endeavours.
What tends to happen a lot with um, company union issues is it's only when there's a crisis they really engage. So the communication needs to be consistent.
You'll also learn how to spot deception during a negotiation and when to walk away.
It would be very difficult to get me to agree to anything unless I'm 100% convinced. And I'm happy if it comes to it, I'm happy to just say no thanks, walk away. I won't typically call somebody on it if I think they're being deceptive.
The theme for this season is Embracing Life's Tapestry, and my guest is Joseph Maguire. Joe, you're now running a business called Clearsight Communications. Before starting your own business, you were involved as a trade union negotiator for a number of years. What led you to change career track and set your own business up as Clearsight Communications?
Gosh, that's a long time ago, John. That's a long time ago. I wasn't really, technically speaking, I wasn't a trade union negotiator. I was a shop steward in the company I was working with. So I was involved in negotiations, but I was I was a lot younger. I was very immature. I didn't have the self-confidence or the emotional intelligence, the life awareness to really be of much assistance to the trade union rep. But I would say I learned a lot from observation. But that's going back a long time. So it was some years later that I started my own business, but it wasn't initially Clearsight because I worked as a therapist for almost 30 years. And it was that allowed me to use a lot of the skills I use now because in my training, I was taught how to read faces and body language. So I was using that in my practice for like 30 years and teaching a lot of it also in, seminars, workshops, different courses. But it was after the 30 years, my body said enough. Because I was taking on too much of other people's stress, plus my own life stress. And it just made sense to move sideways, as it were, because I knew people in the US in particular who'd been using face reading and body language in the business world, in the corporate world, in the legal world. And it just made sense for me to use those skills, which I'd really honed over many years to bring them into the business arena here.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight there, Joe, because I have been reading some articles on LinkedIn recently. They're from a man called Greg Williams, who is a well-known strategist around the whole area of negotiations. And what he was saying there was, in one article, beware the aggressive negotiator who's going to try and push you into conceding an awful lot in a negotiation process. And what he suggested was one way of getting around that scenario is to say no and call a halt to the negotiations. Then that forces the aggressive negotiator to rethink their position. What's your thought on that process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one approach. There are many approaches. I mean, to be honest, when I come across that kind of approach, I just start laughing because I just find it so silly. Because it's when somebody is behaving aggressively like that, it tells you they're not in a position of strength. They're not coming from us. My phone is. It tells you that they actually lack confidence in their position. So there's a weakness in there somewhere. But so many people feel overwhelmed when they face that aggression and they cave in and they get uncertain, they get jittery. And the last thing they want to do is stay in the room. But if we can just relax, take a breath, and either say no, like you said, or just actually start laughing, or just lean back in the chair and say, "Really, look, let's cut the crap. Let's just start again." We're here to do business. You either want to do business, you're either serious or you're not. So there are multiple approaches, but it's to not get caught up in a reaction to their aggression. That's their stuff. It's got nothing to do with us, but it's telling us they're actually not in this position of strength they like to portray.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there, Joe, is don't get involved in the emotion of the occasion.
Yeah.
Try and stay, focused on what the ultimate agenda is, which is to achieve a collaborative win-win approach, for our negotiation approach in the negotiations. It's not all about win-lose. That's compromise. Too often in life, people mix up the word compromise with collaboration. That's one of my bugbears,
Yeah.
where people say, I want you to compromise, John or Joe. Effectively, what they're saying is, I want you to give something away to me. Collaboration is win-win. That's where everybody gets, something out of the negotiation process. Another thing is with negotiations, I think, is to, again, Greg Williams focused on this recently in an article on LinkedIn, was to talk about, where he talked about understanding why the other person in the negotiation is to try and understand their why. What's their ulterior motive?
Yeah.
What's your thought
Yeah.
on that?
Very important, very important. And it's not necessarily in the words they use. So it's obviously doing research prior. So, and for me, research involves not just looking at their company, the public face as aware of their business, but asking like, who do I know who has done business with them? Who do I know who actually knows them? And don't just mean that they're a number on LinkedIn or wherever. So getting some background research. Then obviously with my skills, it's about reading them. So I'm not listening simply to what they say. I'm listening to how they say it. I'm listening to gaps in the speech. I'm listening to changes in their tone, changes in the rhythm of speech, which will indicate anxiety, insecurity. I'm listening, I'm paying attention to changes in their breathing patterns. I'm watching for changes in gesture, whether people are sitting more forward, sitting back, all things like that will tell me a lot about where they're really coming from. And even things like one particular thing to pay attention to if we're in a negotiation is watch the blink rate. Like if people, the normal blink rate is something around about 10, 12 per minute. But you'll sometimes, if people are anxious, the blink rate will really start to speed up. So paying attention to things like that will tell you where people are really coming from and whether they really believe what they're saying. So there's a lot of clues. It's very important to know absolutely where they're really coming from and what's their real motivation, what's their real intention.
I agree. That's a very good point you're making there, Joe, because what you're saying effectively is if you're in a negotiation process, you have to watch the body language and the tone of voice of the person you're negotiating with. So if they start out slow and deliberate, and then midway through the negotiation process, their body language becomes more animated, or their rate of speech increases, or the pitch of their voice increases, that would suggest anxiety on their part, for example, and they're trying to get to a closing position quickly. And then you can use subtle ways of slowing the negotiation down again to your pace to get control back of the negotiation process. So there's a huge amount of learning for people in negotiation in terms of observing and watching people's body language and the tone of their voice. That's a point well made.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned a great trick many years ago from a man in DHL called Mike Carney, where we were doing negotiation with a third party company, and we introduced the whole area of silence into the negotiation. Well, Mike Carney did.
Mm-hmm.
Bought us time to reflect on our position, and then it caused the other person to start conceding to us because they
Yeah.
came into the negotiation process with quite a stringent or strong point they wanted to make. But we used silence to weaken their argument. That was a
Yeah.
great learning for me as a young person many years ago in a very busy supply chain business world, which is very dynamic to say the least, where there's always pressure on to give customer savings, for example. You mentioned there also that you were a therapist for many years. Uh, so what type of therapy service that you provide to your clients then?
Okay, well, for me. That's a previous lifetime.
Yeah.
So I was in what you might call the holistic or the complementary field, and I trained in a number of different modalities, trained and qualified. And amongst like a lot of my clients were actually other therapists, including like healthcare professionals, including doctors, nurses, psychotherapists, psychologists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, physiotherapists, counselors. So I had a lot of, my peers, as it were, coming to me alongside, business professionals, CEOs, bankers, lawyers, etc. And really, I I never got into the idea that what I was doing was anything alternative. I always made sure that make it very clear that what I was doing was something very practical, and it was either going to help people and they were going to experience the benefit, or they weren't. Like it was always I was always very I was probably much more, if you like, science based than holistic based in many ways. But I just knew what I was offering was very practical. And these were like, by and large, these were very practical people coming to me. So again, it was like, so I was paying a lot of attention to, again, observing them as well. And I wasn't just dealing, like if somebody came with a back problem, I wasn't just looking to release the back pain. I was looking to help them with the life stress that was contributing to the back pain. So again, it was always very much about reading the person, again, where they were really coming from. And quite often what I found was people would tell me a lot of stuff in confidence that they'd never told anybody about. In some cases, never spoken to their life partner about, husband, wife, whatever, because they found they were in a safe space with me. So they were very comfortable revealing things, and they knew it would be strictly confidential. So again, I was there as a, if you like, a catalyst for them to release a lot of life stress as well as whatever physical ailments they were coming with.
You mentioned there also that you were a union shop steward for a number of years in your formative part of your business career. I read an article there today on DW.com where the number of people who are members of trade unions in Germany is increasing again. Now, the economy in Germany is going through, I suppose you could say, some element of structural change
Yep.
because their motor industry is under severe pressure from the Chinese EV market, for example. So
Yep.
the likes of Volkswagen, uh, BMW, Porsche, they're having to move towards EVs and hybrid engines and move away from diesel and petrol powered engines. So there's going to be job losses in that sector in Germany. Do you think there's a good role or a positive role for unions to play in, in economies where there is structural change being undertaken?
Yeah, again, it's a long way from my past, but really, it's, for me, that's about collaboration. It's about constructive collaboration. And if we're in a model of aggressive negotiation, either on behalf of the company or the corporation and the union, then it's not a way to go. But if both parties are willing to engage in constructive communication,
Yeah.
ongoing, consistent, and it needs to be consistent, because what tends to happen a lot with um, company union issues is it's only when there's a crisis they really engage. So the communication needs to be consistent, and like regular briefings as to what's really happening, and then it's far easier to build relationship. But there's so many layers and so many levels to the bigger the company. There's so many layers, so many levels within the company, and then even within the union organization, and then between the union and its members. There's a lot of internal negotiation needs to happen as well. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but potentially can be very, not just very positive, but very necessary. But it has to be done with great care.
Yeah. I know what you're saying there, Joe, because just citing some big German companies, Deutsche Bahn, for example, and Lufthansa, they have both been uh, companies that have suffered from some industrial unrest in recent. For example, Deutsche Bahn, the train drivers went out on strike for 6 days recently, and now Lufthansa's ground crew are threatening to go out and strike, So there's been a lot of disruption in that in those sectors in Germany of recent. We've had it in the past ourselves here in Ireland also, so we can't talk. What gave you the motivation to set up Clearsight Communications and move away from the therapy?
Yeah, well, it was that my body just said my body had enough of being a therapist. I think the first thing I tore a rotator cuff muscle in my right shoulder. Then I was out of action for a few months with that. Then I got a virus. Then I had a problem with my left shoulder. So my body just kept giving me messages. It was time to stop. So I had to. I was self-employed, so I had to create something new from that. There was no fallback position. So and it was I had started doing like business networking probably a couple of years prior to that, and I was doing some actual networking training in business networking. I was attending, and there was a credibility class, and there was a trainer came over from the UK, and as it happened, I was the only one who showed up for the class, so I had like a full class to myself. And I told her about my situation, that my body was just not allowing me to continue. And then she asked me, what else could I do? So I told her I was trained to read faces and body language. So she asked me to tell her something about her. And this was the first time I'd met her. So I told her, and it was 100% accurate. So she said, okay, that's where you need to focus. So that's when I started doing the research into who was doing it in the US, because there were a number of people very successful in the field in the US. And so it was of necessity to start it, and just it was really the networking and the online research that gave me a direction.
Yeah, what inspires you the most to be successful in life?
Hunger sometimes. Like there's the practical things of having a roof over your head and keep food on the table. And I'm not being facetious with that. There's also the desire to connect with people. And I know my skills can be of huge benefit to people in both their professional and their personal relationships, because there are so many, there's so many reports. Like I've been reading the Edelman Trust report for the last number of years, and trust is a big issue in, again, professional and personal relationships. And I can help people bridge the gap where there is a lack of trust, where there's a lack of clarity of communication, where there's a lack of, in many cases, respect, and a lack of just genuine understanding. So I know my skills, and well utilized, can make a massive difference in people's lives. And that's a very powerful motivation, because when I see it's like the light bulb moment people get. They realize, oh, so that's what was going on. That's what was happening. That's why they responded in this way. And when they see, oh, so now I know how I can change it. And I see that response in people, that's something that's just so immensely rewarding for me. And so that's a very, very powerful motivation.
Very interesting answer. And the next question I have for you, Joe, is let's say a person approached you and they were trying to negotiate with you, and you got the impression perhaps this person has an ulterior motive. They want more from Joe than he's willing to concede, for example. Would you recognize that in the micro expressions in their face and the tone of their voice? And how would you do that?
Yeah, okay. I don't pay so much attention to micro expressions, to be perfectly honest. I know there's people familiar with the TV series Lie to Me will have come across that, and that originates from the work of a research psychologist called Paul Ekman. I don't pay so much attention to the what I recognized as the 7 micro expressions. But the first is a vibe, just a sensation, and I've learned to pay attention to that. Then I will check the evidence in terms of their facial expression, their body language. I will check the wording they're using, as well as then the tonality. how apparently smooth they are, how much effort they're putting into trying to persuade me of something. And I'm not easily persuaded. I'm not easily convinced of anything. So, and that's come from practice. Like I mentioned, when I was a shop steward so many years ago, I had so little confidence, and my confidence now is very solid. So there are many situations that many people tell me they would feel very uncomfortable in, and I feel just this is my playground. So I would expect to notice it, and it would be very difficult to get me to agree to anything unless I'm 100% convinced. And I'm happy if it comes to it, I'm happy to just say no, thanks, walk away. I won't typically call somebody on it if I think they're being deceptive. That's not necessarily the best way to go. But I would just say, look, not for me, thanks. But if I think they're being deceptive, I will tell people I know. Just if you come across this individual, be on alert.
Would you be a person who's been through the school of hard knocks, and has that toughened you up in life, Joe?
Strengthened me. I would say strengthen me rather than toughening me up. I've a bit of resistance to the word tough, or because to me it aligns with being hard.
Yeah.
That's just a personal sort of interpretation, but strengthened me, yes, absolutely. I've learned a lot, as we all do from hard knocks. And that's the thing, it's being willing to learn the lessons. And it's also not to put blame on anybody for anything they've done. That, oh, you did this to me, you made me angry, or whatever it was, because nobody actually does that. It's our internal response. And it's to recognize that my response on so many occasions didn't serve me. So as to recognize I have a choice, and it's I can't remember the exact wording of the Viktor Frankl quote, but it's that there's always that moment of choice when somebody behaves towards us in a way we don't like. We have a moment of choice to determine our reaction or whether we react, and it's to recognize we have that freedom to choose. So that comes with experience, or in some cases, I guess, doesn't come with experience, because people, there are enough people get triggered, but I'm less and less likely to be triggered.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, Joe. That's a good answer, I think, because I like the word strengthen you up, yeah, rather than toughen you up. Yeah, I'd be the same myself. Like I would rather, when I was young, in my mid-20s in the UK, I was a bit of a greenhorn, to say the least. Like many Irish people in the UK at the time, and experience kind of strengthened you up. And people got in under my skin rather easily because I was vulnerable, I suppose you could say at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Now I have a much more effective coping mechanism to deal with people like that. Yeah. One final question here for you, Joe. If you were given the opportunity to have one single request granted to you without question, what would that be?
And it could be anything. Okay, I would love to have my own small vineyard in Italy, where I was part of a community of artisan food producers. That would be it. Yeah, that would be my personal request. If that's it, if it's something for me, if it's for the world at large, then I would have kindness. I would love to see kindness just ripple out everywhere.
And one very last question, Joe, just came to my head there. Let's say somebody comes to you as a potential client. They're young, their face, shows a lot of emotional expression, and they're going to be entering into negotiation processes. What advice would you give to that person to try and maintain a more pan-faced expression, or is that possible?
It would involve a bit of training. It would involve proper training and preparation. I would also want to know who they're negotiating with, what the issues are, what the challenges are, because I would need to prepare them for dealing with a particular individual or a group of individuals, depending. Because if it's just looking at them in isolation, I'm not being as helpful to them as I could be. So it would involve a number of sessions to prepare them properly.
Yeah. And would that include role-playing exercises, for example?
Oh yeah. And I typically when I'm working with a client like that, what I would do is I would want to know who they're going to be meeting in negotiation. And
Yeah.
then I would be that person in a role play. And I would be as difficult as possible because I want to see how my client is going to be under stress. And once I know how they respond under stress, it gives me a lot of insights into how I can best help them, what help they need, and what's needed to prepare them to deal with, again, this, their counterpart or counterparts in plural as it might be
Yeah.
in the forthcoming negotiation.